Welcome, Lisa Boehm, to the Dish with Dina podcast. What an honor it is to have you join me today.
Dina, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I love how the internet can bring people together. While it sometimes feels like it has me spiraling, there are definitely benefits to joining forces and finding like-minded people, kindred spirits online. So I'm really glad that that is the case for our relationship and whatever is to blossom from here. So thank you again. I wanted to find out if you can please share with our listeners a little bit about your background, your mission, what kind of brought you to who you are and where you are today.
Oh gosh. Well, let's see if I can keep this short and sweet. About 15 years ago, after having worked in oncology for a very, very long time, I just wanted something more for myself. And I dove headfirst into learning how to be a health coach and really focused on women and mothers who just felt overwhelmed and no time and the whole thing, and really felt like I had found my lane. It was something that I believed in and lived and was really thriving at. And then about 8.5 years ago, something broadsided our whole family that just changed the trajectory of my life. And our 17-year-old daughter was killed in a car accident. And as you can imagine, like literally my whole life stopped. Like you can hear the screeching tires, right? And after a period of time of, you know, going through acute grief and doing the work that I needed to do, I really decided that I wanted to work with grieving mothers. Wrote a book, created peer support for them. And as my grief has changed and evolved, so have my needs. And while I still work with those moms very part time, I have really been stepping into a space that reflects more of the mental health of midlife women. I think we're almost this forgotten sector of the population. We talk about men having midlife crises all the time, buying their convertible and, all the things. But not until recently have we talked about midlife women and what our crises look like, because they're completely different from what a man goes through. And as a woman who's in that midlife chapter and observing, friends and family and neighbors and so on who are also going through this, I just thought, what a great place to to learn and to have conversation and to support one another. So I also have a podcast, and that is my focus is midlife women, burnout, and resilience. So
Yeah.
that kind of brings us up to where we're at now.
Well, that's one of the things that I really adore about following what I've seen so far of your journey as I've been watching you online, as I've been listening to your podcast episodes, the honesty and transparency that you bring in. I mean, you've really been able to lay out a lot of your own vulnerabilities, and there is strength in that as we've come to learn. And I think that's maybe where I want to start the discussion with you as there's a lot to juggle. I think a lot of times, like you were mentioning, we're kind of like the forgotten group or the population. And it might be because we often step aside to allow other people to be prioritized in our lives. And we end up becoming second, or we're supposed to be super strong for anything that's going on in our lives when really we need to take a minute to allow ourselves some grace and compassion to move through some things. So share with me a little bit about either your journey or the people with whom you've been working with. What are some of the overarching areas that you feel need to be discussed or finessed when you're trying to help somebody get through whatever they're getting through?
As human beings, we want to help people. We want to fix people. And I think that we need to change that narrative and that understanding. I think it all begins with being seen, heard, and validated. And even in my own grief journey, there was nothing anybody could do to fix it. I mean, unless you've got some magical powers that could bring my daughter Katie back, you're not fixing this. But I needed people to sit with me, to listen as I shared, my thoughts and my feelings. I needed them to see me as a grieving mother and just say, yeah, this sucks. I don't need you to tell me to go out and eat more broccoli or to go for a run and get fresh air. I knew all that stuff, but still, that's not what I needed to hear. I needed to hear, yeah, this sucks. I'm so sorry, and things like that. And I think that that's where we need to start with any kind of change, and even to have that discussion and that self-talk with ourselves. Let's say you are transitioning even from being a full-time working mom to maybe now you're considering retirement. Like, gee, that sounds like a great thing, maybe in your 40s, but let me tell you, as it's facing me head on, it's scary. It's scary, and just to have that grace and patience with ourselves, and to turn tables around a little bit. Lisa, I see that you are feeling a little bit of overwhelm. You're feeling these things, and it's okay to take a minute. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Take a minute. What feels, and just to be able to have that inner dialogue with ourselves. I think that's where it all begins.
I've often, in the world in which I am right now, as being a credentialed dietitian, I work with a lot of different patient populations and different chronic conditions. And no matter what anybody's going through, I could say, oh, I read that in chapter 12 of my textbook, and here's some recommendations. But we really try to meet people where they're at. And I think that's something that I hear as well, that comes up in my brain of, this isn't just a case study of somebody that I'm working with. This is a human person with a variety of factors behind them. And so let's talk a little bit about that too. Meeting people where they're at, understanding the individual person, and trying to figure out how to get them the support that they need, right? So a lot of things I think around some of these discussions is about finding people who you can have support you in whatever direction you're going in, whether it is a therapist or it's people that you can delegate to in your family. So can you share a little bit about that too? What kind of strategies might you put in place or help somebody put in place to get them in the language that we might use together of setting SMART goals for themselves, or, going from point A to point B to point Z? Walk us through a little bit of that strategy that you have in mind for them.
Well, this is where I start, and it can be applied to anything that we're going through. Two really important questions that are super simple. What do you want? And what do you need? Because I think they are typically two different things, right? We might need a hug. We might need space. We might need, a variety of things. But what we want can be entirely different. What we might want is more peace, more calm, to lose 10 pounds, to feel better in our clothes, whatever it is. But what we need in that moment is sometimes very different. And a lot of times I catch people off guard when I say, what do you need? And sometimes the tears actually spring into their eyes because no one has taken the time to ask them what they need. So that's where I start. I also have a strategy that I have coined, the 1% shift strategy. And again, super simple. But I think we live in this world of instant gratification. Like, speaking of weight loss, I'm guilty too, but we think, oh gosh, it's summer. I've got to go to this pool party. I've got to go to this wedding. And oh my gosh, my dress is a little tight, or my bathing suit. I want to lose 10 pounds in the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to go for a sweat run every day, in the 40-degree weather. I'm in Canada, so I can't remember what that is for you folks. Anyway, super hot. I'm going to go to the gym every day, and I'm going to subsist on 200 calories. The problem with that, logically, on some weird level, it makes sense, right? Because we're like, I can do this. The problem is it's uncomfortable. It's not sustainable. It's not going to work. You're probably not going to make it through the day, right? Whereas when we can make small 1% shifts, they are easy peasy breezy. They're so easy that you're not even going to they're not going to feel like a big deal in your day. And because they're so easy, they're maintainable, they're manageable, they're sustainable. So they become habits. And as we all know, those small habits make big changes. In fact, I just gave a keynote last weekend, and I remember looking out at the audience, starting to talk about this 1% shift strategy. And I had some people, just like this lady looking at me like I was crazy. And I said, okay, let's dial this back a little bit. Here's some real simple math. If we make a 1% change in our day for 100 days, what happens? We either blow that goal out of the water in 100 days, or we're making some massive headway. So whether it's weight loss, whether it's, grief management, whether it's, something new. Like we both started podcasts. That was hard. If we did a 1% shift change every day, by that 3 or 4 month mark, our podcast is up and running. So you can apply this to anything. And I think it just takes the weight off our shoulders. Anything we do doesn't have to be big and massive and heavy. It can be the simplest things.
I so appreciate that. I also want to talk a little bit about the limiting mindset or the friction or the in our world, we call these like the stages of change or the stages of readiness. And being able, especially for you, because you're working with people and having to gauge that discussion, okay, they might not be ready for this priority to shift, but maybe they can work on something else. So, what are some of I don't like calling them excuses. I like to just say, what are some of the reasons that people might give you that hold them back from making even something like just a 1% shift? And how might you get them over that hurdle to redirect that challenge, that obstacle?
I take a lot of this and I call it mindset. I know it can be referred to as a lot of different things. In the grief world, at least with grieving mothers, I have met a large number of women who feel that their grief is directly related to the love they had for their child or they still have for their child. And by working on their grief, that means letting go of the pain, which means letting go of their child. So there's a lot of work we have to do there to reframe the language that we're using, because I think sometimes just the basic language gets in our head and holds us back. So that's one piece. The second piece is perspective. And I think that perspective is so powerful because perspective is just the way we look at things, right? In my mind's eye, I picture like a magnifying glass. And that magnifying glass has got a flippable lens. So you can flip it one way, you can flip it the other. And in just about any situation, we can look at things through worst case scenario, right? Like all the doom, all the gloom, my life is over, whatever it is. I can't do this. This is impossible. That flip, if we can flip that lens and somehow take a look at things through a different angle, things start to change. I'll give you an example. Now, this didn't happen for me right away, but at some point into my grief journey, several months in, I remember having a moment actually of happiness, like literally a moment, not. And I remember feeling so much guilt. How can I feel happy? My child has died. But then I realized that just because I was happy for a moment didn't take away my grief, didn't make me forget Katie. And a second piece to that, as you mentioned, I have worked in oncology. Now it's been 33 years. So it's been a minute, but I remember being that angry mom, right? Like, why my kid? She was 17. She never got to graduate high school. She just had received an entrance scholarship into the faculty of nursing. She'll never get to be a nurse. She'll blah, 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 blah. And I was angry. But when I was able to take a step back and, as I say, flip that lens in my magnifying glass, and it was like, boom, it hit me, because I thought, Lisa, you have met hundreds and hundreds of families at the cancer clinic where the patient is the child. And that family comes in day after day, week after week, sometimes year after year. And a lot of times they don't get to take their child home. So instead of me complaining, I only got 17 and a half years with my daughter, now my language, now my words are different. Now I say, I got 17 and a half years with Katie. She was healthy. She was happy. We got to travel a lot. We got to make amazing memories. And for that, I'm so grateful. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. That does not happen overnight. And when you are in the weeds of adversity, whatever that might be, it's hard. It's hard to find the way to flip that lens. But I do think that, and not to get too caught up here in cliches and things that are said over and over again, but I do believe that we are the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And I found that on my own journey as well. Any kind of adversity. If I am hanging out with people who are all doom and gloom, if I'm trying to run my first 5K and I'm hanging out with the happy hour crew, it doesn't align, right? And I found that with grief too. I needed people who were hopeful and uplifting and encouraging. So that's who I wanted to spend more time with. And that shifted the way that I was able to look at things.
This ties in nicely to what I want to ask next, or maybe have a conversation about next too, where if somebody is a bit stuck or having something that does feel so heavy that I don't love the word motivation in a case like that. I don't feel you can find motivation to maybe move through, whether it's external or internal. I tend to ask people to reframe it as to what can you commit to? Like just make a small commitment to yourself that at the very least you'll get up and brush your teeth or take a shower or take a walk around the block or anything just to get you away from your usual routine and break that habit. And maybe that kind of is along the lines of that 1% strategy that you mentioned too, in maybe of a more micro way. What are your thoughts about that too? To find motivation in something or to find the reward in something when there has been a lot of negativity going around, it's very hard for people to just shift their whole focus. What can you get them to help move them over that hump?
Honestly, I hate to sound so cliche, but self care, self care, self care. Um, I've been working with this group for a number of years, and 2, 3 times a year, I'll kind of change it up a little bit every time, but we do self care challenge. And I mean, these are people who are going through an immensely difficult time in their lives, but sometimes just having a different focus for their week, and I'm talking simple. Day one might be drinking 8 cups of water. Day two might be adding one fruit or one vegetable to their day. Day three might be taking the dog for a walk. So we're talking simple, but woven in there is some other messaging that I'm sharing with them. And I'll tell you, I have them rate how they went into the challenge to begin with. And then the very last thing we do is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today? And it's always like 2 to 8 is the average, and some people, maybe not so great, and some people bigger than that. But it's just, I think we need to get a change of scenery, if you will, right? When we look at the same thing, we're sitting in the same feelings all the time. It's hard to break out of that. But again, just those tiny little things, and you're doing them together in a community, connected, other people doing the same thing that you are. I think there's so much power in that.
I absolutely adore that. And that feels very inspiring because I do think we have it within us to be able to move through something, to process things. And also, like you said before, one thing doesn't necessarily cancel out the other thing. Like you're still allowed to live in these worlds that are now interwoven in some way without you feeling like you've left something behind. In the healthcare providers world, I usually ask people, give me 3 months, or at least give yourself 3 months, because the way that
Mm-hmm.
our the healthcare system works here, if you have a physical exam or you have been diagnosed, not diagnosed, but if you've had a blood test come back abnormal, the doctor will usually say come back in 3 months because that's the way the red blood cells work, is they regenerate after 3 or 4 months. And so I'll say something like, if we're working on a diabetes discussion, if we're working on a cholesterol discussion, let's try to apply something as a commitment for 3 months. What are some of the things that you've noticed? What are some of the time commitments that you have come across or that you'll ask people, allow yourself at least this much time, because we might not see things change overnight, like you mentioned before with the immediate gratification. What would be a good average, maybe, of what you could encourage people to give themselves, or when working with you as well, to allow them to see some sort of difference take place?
This might not be the answer that people want to hear, but when it comes to grief, and I think when it comes to any kind of adversity, let's say folks are going through a divorce, let's say they've lost a job, their health, like a loss of an aspect of their health, that's grief. We carry that with us forever. It's a double-edged sword to tell people you're going to carry this forever, because you can just see them go, what? Right? Like this fear and this. But then I say, but the good news is, as we carry it, we get so much stronger. And as we carry it, we're going to learn to carry, grief or adversity, pain, whatever it is, discomfort in one hand, and the joy and the hope and all the goodness in the other. And that is where, but it's going to take time. I'm still learning. I'm 8.5 years out. This is a lifelong learning. thing, right? It's part of being human. But I think the key with that statement though is giving ourselves grace. Like, we're going to carry this forever, so let's just slow down. Let's take some baby steps, and let's know that there's going to be a lot of stumbling and a lot of falling, but we're going to get back up and we're going to walk this path together.
This speaks along the lines of the progress, not perfection. We're always a work in
Yes.
progress. There are always different things that might trigger something and we relapse in some way. And then, but like you said, with the building of the strength of the tools that we have in place, we now know how to face that particular situation to allow us to process and move through that. So some of the things that I know, or I'm hearing also from you is, and myself as well, is we're assessing something and we're trying to be gracious and maybe adding to our usual regimen to help us move past whatever is keeping us stuck. What might be some of your advice about letting things go? What are some things that people can do to be able to detach from things or people or situations that no longer serve them? Like you said, the 5 people around you. Okay, but what if you have like 100 people who are just not bringing anything to the table? What might be some of the advice you can give of people who are afraid to break away from things that are no longer serving them?
I think a good perspective is to focus on the adding into your life rather than the taking away. Like, if I think from a diet perspective, like if somebody says to me, Lisa, no more chips, like ever, forget it. It's like the sweat breaks out and I start thinking, I'm not doing this thing, right? I can't. No. But if somebody says, when you sit down on a Friday night with your cold beverage, why don't you have a handful of fresh vegetables from the garden and then you can have your chips? Okay, deal. That's easy. And I think when we add in, we focus on the adding, what we're getting, right? Not the taking away, because I think the more of the right things we bring into our lives, whether it's food, whether it's friends, whether it's habits, the more the unhealthy ones, people or habits, whatever it is, tend to fade away, because the healthy, good stuff feels so good. The right people in your life feel so good. You're going to want to hang out with them more, right? And you're not going to tend to flock to or need to feel like you need to be with the people that are maybe sucking the life out of you. And so I think that's the focus that I choose to offer people.
I want to also ask, because I think this ties in nicely to this question too about setting boundaries. What are the
Mm.
uncomfortable but necessary conversations that we might have to have, especially when, like we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, we're maybe giving too much of ourselves and we really need to focus on self-care or time away from things or shifting our perspective. Do you advise anybody of what kind of language or example statements that they can use when they need to maybe set up some guidelines and some boundaries with themselves also, but maybe with other people too?
Again, I think it starts with those simple questions with ourselves, like what feels good for me and what doesn't feel good? What feels heavy? What could I have less of in my life? What do I want more of in my life? I know when my therapist first asked me that years ago, I think I stared at her blankly for a minute and started to cry because I didn't know how to answer it. Right. But I think it's a gradual thing. I haven't met a single human who's like, oh, well, this is my boundary. You know, I'm not going to, it evolves and it morphs and it changes. And I think it's really important that we are constantly checking in with ourselves. Like, did that feel good? Because that used to be a boundary for me. Maybe it's like, okay now to let that boundary go or to change it. Or maybe it's like, no, I got to tighten that boundary up. But it's just, in my mind, it's constant reflection of what feels good and checking in with our intuition. I mean, our brain has got all kinds of logistical, I should be doing that. I should see mom and dad more often. I should, as a good mom, I should be doing this. Well, check in with your gut. Your gut's always going to tell you what is right for you. And, sometimes it's just our actions that will tell other people that you're not allowing this anymore. Sometimes it's just a no, thank you. You know what? You guys go ahead to the bar. I'm drawing the line there. That's just not my thing anymore. It might be having to get verbal. What you just said back there was not okay. And I just want you to know that I will not tolerate that anymore. But I find 99 times out of 100, it's just our simple actions of reacting in a certain way. And that person knows that that is your boundary.
Leading by example, modeling behaviors, allowing people to chime in with that like-mindedness as well, that the dynamic tends to shift in that direction. But just like you said, if we do have to speak up and say something, the action that the other person is receiving that information will let you know where they stand in your support system or in your community, right? If it becomes they're centering themselves or they push back and become a little bit defensive about something, that can tell you, okay, you know what? Like that just made me feel very uncomfortable. And I no longer want to maybe spend time with this person or allow their energy to infiltrate what I'm trying to pursue in my life. Lisa, share with us a little bit about a week in the life of you. A lot of people that listen and now watch on YouTube this podcast are also juggling a million things. Hello, we're humans, and this is the name of the game sometimes. What kind of productivity tools do you use to keep yourself on track with whatever it is that you're doing? What kind of self-care strategies do you use for yourself even now? Like, do you make sure you carve out a day of the week or 2 days of the week or one week, a quarter where you're just doing nothing? Share with us a little bit about how you manage your own personal and professional responsibilities.
Oh my gosh. Well, at last count, I have 5 jobs. So yeah, I do a little bit of everything, but and I've recently just decided, okay, I'm actually doing currently, as we speak, I'm doing a time audit on myself. Where am I spending all my time, like literally minute by minute? And I'm going to do a little slicing and dicing at the end of the week. And because I can't keep up with this, I am I'm a high achiever and an overdoer, and that is to my own detriment. Now, I don't know if everybody's going to be watching on YouTube here, but I'm going to show this to you. I'm a pen and paper girl. Whoops, there it is. And I love lists. I get so much joy out of striking things off my list, and I will add things in, and it's terrible. So I have to be more aware. I'm getting better at boundaries. I'm getting better at, it's hard when you work at home. Gosh, it's easy to slip into the office and open up the laptop. I'm just going to be here for 5 minutes and 2 hours goes by. I'm actually thinking about closing the office door just so I have to mindfully make that decision, but definitely taking things off my plate, doing that more. And self-care is a non-negotiable for me. That is my number one go-to for mental health. So movement is a part of my day every day. If I can, I live here in Canada, winters are brutal, but if I can, I will get out and get fresh air every day. Even if it's, a 5-minute walk, that's a priority. I lift weights in my basement. Eating healthy food is just, I, anybody who's listening that has gone, made the change into a healthier lifestyle, I can't even explain to you what it does for my mental health. I just feel so much better when I fuel my body. I'm getting enough water, sleeping well, which I know is tough, especially when you get into midlife, but making those things a priority. I know it sounds cheesy and like too simple to actually be helpful, but those are my basics and always have been, like for the last 15 years. So the time management is a work in progress. I don't really use tools. I use the calendar on my phone just because I always have my phone with me. So at a glance, I can check, see, can I fit that haircut in there? Or can I, can I be a guest on a podcast? Can I have an additional guest on my podcast this week and so on? But just, through trial and error, just trying to figure out what works best for me.
Yeah, I am cracking up. I've said this, I mean, whoever's listening to this podcast, if you've listened to this from like day one, even if you haven't, if you've listened to just a smattering of episodes, I tend to say, and I joke sometimes, I went from, I think, 7 jobs at one point, and I'm like, am I an entrepreneur or am I just like a part-time employee doing 7 part-time jobs? It's ridiculous the amount of things that I have wanted to juggle in order to pretend like I have control over my life and my time and my finances. It's definitely not for the faint of heart, as I've tend to say, especially when it comes to like tax season too, where you're trying to
Oh,
corral your independent contractor stuff versus your payroll stuff. It gets a little
mhm.
cuckoo. I like what you shared though. The time audit is huge with me. As at the time of this recording, in the last couple of weeks, this has been one of those times in my life where there is no breathing space at all in between things. I feel like I slam shut one thing and run right into the next thing, or just the way things are situated. I like to be efficient with my time. I'm sure you do too, Lisa. We're all batch stuff. So sometimes I'll just spend a whole entire day or 4 hours doing something that is of like responsibility, like tasks. So I don't have to shift my brain around too much. And that in itself is how I kind of try to remain productive. I'm a digital gal in like you are. I keep my calendar on my phone. I'm always setting alarms for things, but I also love scratching things off and I love making checklists and I love different colored markers and pens, office supplies that I buy and don't use is kind of really sad, but whatever works for. So if anyone's listening to this, whatever works for you. But the point is if you do feel like this is too much. I cannot breathe under the weight of all the things that I am juggling. It's a great opportunity to figure out where and how and when you might be able to work around some of those things. I'm fortunate enough where I have the budget set aside that sometimes, as much as I would love to do grocery shopping and cook food every single day from scratch, I just do not have the ability to do that right now. So I'll set Monday aside to have a food delivered from, I'll order from the grocery store and or ready prepared things like a roasted chicken, grilled fish or whatever, and then side dishes and I'll assemble them here. So I'm fortunate for that. I would love to get a house cleaner at some point because this place is bananas, but I will always do my own laundry because it's very expensive to drop it off. So it's like almost 3 times as much money. So doing my laundry, I already commit, 2 hours out of my day and I only do whatever many loads. So it's really just a matter of meeting you where you're at in your own personal world. And if you do have the ability, if there are people in your life, whether they are children or partners or whoever's living with you, roommates, etc., asking for them to alleviate some of that burden, right? You're noticing, like, I feel like I'm doing all of this myself a lot of times, and it would be great if somebody else can pick up the slack in a very respectful way. Let's try to see if this is a win-win. I do this and you do that. And maybe at the end of the week, we both do a little bit of something and then we reward ourselves with something else. But I very much encourage people try to avoid burnout because we are no good to anybody and ourselves, right? If we're not filling up that tank. Lisa, as we're wrapping up towards the end of our conversation, can you share with me and our listeners, our viewers, what do you see as the future you? What are some of the things that you're currently working on right now that you'd like to continue working on? What are some things that you feel like you might start letting go so that maybe those 5 jobs dwindle down to 2 jobs? Tell us a little bit about where you see your future going.
I am really loving keynote speaking right now. It's something that I don't do a lot of yet. About once a month is what my average is. But I love the stage and I just love being able to reach and share messages of resilience. I think that we are in a season right now in this world where we need that message. And so I really enjoy doing that. I think my 33, almost 34 oncology degree, or rather career, is probably going to come to a point where I'm going to hand the baton off to somebody else. And I am just really open to what the universe brings me next. I think it's such an adventure, and I think when we're open to change and open to new adventures, they come our way.
I really do encourage that as well for people who I think we either started recording when we were talking about this or maybe right before we hit record, the fearlessness factor, right? So maybe people of a certain age or people who have just been prone to be responsible for many things might often think, well, it's too late for me to start, or now I've shifted careers and now I feel like I'm an imposter. The imposter syndrome rears its ugly head. And so I really love that you're open to something. And I do believe too that if we remain closed off, then we're keeping our blinders on, for lack of a better term, of things that might be out there and sharing opportunities. So the fact that you are open to opportunities, you are in front of the public saying a lot of very personal things that resonate with somebody, that opens up other doors, and you become the gift that keeps on giving. And then our circles become larger, even though in a way our world becomes smaller because we now are all connected in a certain way that we weren't before. So there's so much out there that I really do hope people can feel like, they deserve a little slice of that pie as well if they haven't been getting it. Is there anything that we didn't touch upon today? Anything that you'd like to share that, words of wisdoms, lessons learned, any final things you want to impart that we might not have organically come upon in this conversation?
Circling back to what you just said, I think an important thing for allowing things to come into our lives is actually making space for it. Like, here's you and I, you've spoken about having 7 jobs. I just said I had 5. Well, guess what? The universe has no space to deliver the next thing when we are jam packed up to our eyeballs. So I think that simple act of letting go of what no longer serves us so that we have the space and the bandwidth for the next thing is going to allow that next thing to come to us.
That is a fantastic way of sharing some insight and advice. Again, it feels so simple when we say these things. We all know better. We sometimes don't do better. But knowing that people like Lisa and I are in your corner, then hopefully we've given you some insight and inspiration and guidance that you feel like you can take that next step. As of right now, I know for myself, one of the things that no matter what I'm juggling, I always try to make sure that I have the AM and the PM routines in place. Like those are kind of my non-negotiables. Like you were saying with your self-care discussion, is that even if I'm cramming in or I feel like, oh gosh, I haven't finished that particular task or presentation or lesson plan, whatever happens to be on my list, I can't stay until midnight working on something, because again, it takes away from my sanity, my ability to focus. I mean, that's something too, right? When we're not really paying attention to things, we're more likely to get injured or not concentrate on certain things. And so we want to make sure that we're refilling that empty vase that we might end up not being so careful about. So thank you for all of this, Lisa. Before we officially wrap up, I want to ask you my famous last two-part question, which is, what is on your plate today, Lisa? We are wrapping this up in kind of like the evening. Well, actually, for you, I think it's more like late afternoon. For me, it's a little bit early evening time. What is on your plate, both figuratively and literally? What's the next thing you might be working on after, either immediately right after this or soon after? And what is the next meal that you will be eating?
Well, I have just started I'm a research-based girl. I've just started adding collagen into my diet, and for gut health and for all kinds of reasons. So that is my new thing. I will be having more than just collagen, but since you asked, that will be part of it. And I'm actually taking part in a podcast challenge this week. It's a podcast growth challenge. So that is what is immediately happening in my world this week, and just exploring different ways to become more visible and get myself out there a little bit more.
That 1% strategy that you're adding onto your podcast.
Yes,
I
exactly.
That is so fun and fantastic. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I really took away so much information. I also, like I said, I kind of knew some things, but you've breathed new life into where I felt a little bit stagnant. And I hope that anyone listening or watching this episode feels the same way. So thank you again, Lisa, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Dina.